Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Savvy Report. I'm Ernie Martin, founder and managing director of Receivable Savvy, where we provide research and best practice to help master the order-to-cash process. Today, we're speaking with Jasmine Ahmed, Senior Vice President, Global Head of Finance Transformation for News Corp. News Corp is a global media and information services holding company overseeing brands such as the Wall Street Journal, the Sunday Times, and MarketWatch. So hello, Jasmine, and welcome to this episode of the Savvy Report.
Hi, Ernie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And thank you again for joining us and making time for us.
No, thank you for having me. I always enjoy speaking to you and just anyone who's interested in learning or hearing from me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. And so if you could tell us what finance transformation is at a very high level.
At a very high level, finance transformation for me is for every organization, you need a finance function to manage the finances, right? And to manage the books and records. Finance transformation is taking that same function and looking into the future and saying, okay, how should finance really work for this organization in the future as the business evolves, as the dynamics around us evolve, as the facts and circumstances evolve, the talent evolves, the technology evolves. It's really looking into the future of what is the role of finance, how should finance operate to continuously increase the value proposition that it brings back to the business.
Right. Excellent. And, one of the reasons why I'm excited that you're with us is, I think back to the very first conversation we had, and you were sharing with me what it is that you do and how it's a little different compared to how other organizations approach order to cash. And so walk us through sort of what you specifically do at News Corp and how you created the first enterprise-wide global finance transformation function at News Corp.
Right. So on one end, given our discipline or given what I'm very passionate about is looking at finance as a function holistically of what finance could look like for the future and how it can become much more of an autonomous finance capability where there's a lot more predictability of how predicting what the results and the outcomes could look like, what are the various levers the business can pull to get the expected outcomes that they want and reduce variability, right? That's what, we as finance professionals, we do not like unknowns. We like predictability and everything. Right. So as I think about that, the other aspect as I now go into, let's say, News Corp or any other organization, is I do not go in with a playbook that this is what the future is, and this is what you must do, and this is how it should work. I really don't believe in any playbooks. Do I believe in best practices? Yes. But then as I go into News Corp or any other organization, as I've been doing this for many years, is I look at the needs of the organization. Mm-hmm. What is the organization? What are the organizational needs? What is the culture of the organization? What is the current state of the organization? And where does the organization want to go, both as a collective group, but also as a business as well? And then say, okay, well, now let me strip back and say, okay, what is the right future, or what is the more optimal future that is also practical and pragmatic for that organization from a people, process, technology, and data, because that's like the fourth thing that I think we must look at. And then step back and say, well, if that is the practical, quote unquote, North Star for that organization, what is the journey now to get there for that organization that's very much customized for what the people and that organization can cope with.
Right. And so you're touching on customization and looking for what that particular organization needs. And as we know, everyone loves change, right? Everyone just loves
absolutely.
change.
Absolutely. I'm like, yes, I'm the person, I'm the transformation, I'm the change agent or the change leader that everyone is jumping up and down to have me in the room.
Exactly, exactly. And I could imagine you're very popular.
Very
Being
popular.
the, exactly. Being the driver of change, or one of the drivers of change
Yeah.
within the organization. And so, and as we know, in reality, many people, including executives, resist change because oftentimes it's very painful. There's uncertainty or unknowns, as you mentioned before. And in finance, where things are supposed to add up and make sense, change sometimes does not appear to make sense until you get to the very end. And so, from your perspective, how do you keep finance leaders focused during transformation?
All right. So there's a few things. One, I would say the resistance to change itself. I completely sympathize with both my finance peers and colleagues, but also with my non-finance, right? Because at the end of the day, my peer groups and my colleagues out there, they have a job to keep the day-to-day business running.
Right.
And that can never, it's like the shop floor. The shop floor cannot close. Right. And that has to run seamlessly. Yep. Where the resistance part, there's many reasons for the resistance, but one of the primary drivers behind the resistance to change is, hold on, are you going to disrupt what I'm doing already? Because it actually works. It may not be optimal, but it works.
Right.
And there's about a lot of anxiety around it. So as I look at change agenda, it's being very respectful to that, and how do we actually make change happen where the current state does not fall apart, right? You can still run the business. It should be an uptick and an uplift. Now, is change a disruptive? Yes. Does change introduce more strain on the organization and the people and additional work? Yes, because it's before you actually optimize in that future state, there is an uptick. And as you navigate through that uptick, I think what I'm a big believer of is you have to make it easy as painless. You have to take that pain away from the people itself. Right. And this is through infusing them with new capabilities and support system and talent that they need to support them. The new talent is not to break down their kingdoms or break down the mountains that they have, but it's to give them complementary support so that they have more bandwidth and headspace to think about the future.
Right.
That's one of the biggest drivers where many folks just don't have the headspace to think about the future. It's one, how do I give them the tools, and how do I make that in the least pain, and how do I take that pain away, and literally holding their hands all the way through the end until it stabilizes.
Right. And through that process, because we know that sometimes I refer to the middle of the process as the messy middle sometimes, because, sometimes there's a great deal of uncertainty, and sometimes there's resistance, panic, but sometimes you've got champions who grasp what's being done, and they've then become advocates throughout the entire process. So during that messy middle, during the process, is it best to begin incorporating and folding in those solutions and those tools even before you get to the end, to help give staff confidence and those who are going through the process some idea as to how this will work when we get to the end?
Sure. So as I give them, and how do I make that change less painful and give them the support that they need through capabilities, bandwidth, headspace, whatever the tools, technology, whatever they need, right? I think change agents and sponsors and advocates is absolutely pivotal. You need folks who truly see the future, they understand the future. Yep. But before you even go there, and before you even give them that and more support or additional support to help the change happen, you need to, as you start finding your advocates that you in the organization to drive the change, what it comes down to is actually co-creating what those solutions are. Okay. Right. And to get to those co-creation of what that solution is, it's taking the time with your end users, with your user group, to understand what is the art of possibility for the future for them? What are their business challenges and business problems? What's hindering them to move forward? And I think if you can make it more about what are their problems that they would like to be able to solve for if they had a white cloud or a whiteboard,
Yep.
and focusing on that and making incremental changes to solve and address what is problematic to them.
Right.
And I think if you take it from that perspective, it's less about transformation. It's more about converting transformation, shifting transformation to innovation and solving business problems that they're encountering, or they may have conceded to and accepted that as reality.
Right. And could you sort of elaborate a little bit on co-creators? What's a co-creator from your perspective?
So from my perspective, co-creator is spending time with the folks who are actually running the business, they're running the operations day in, day out. It's starting with them to understand like what are, so like if we talk about, you know, are they struggling with their cycle times, or are they struggling with providing their customers? What are their customers looking for, right? Like everyone has a customer. And what are some of their challenges or limitations and how they service their customers? And is it certain outcomes, certain data insights, certain business decisions that they feel like they're not as equipped to provide their customers with due to the limitations that they are encountering?
Right. Okay.
And if you help them look at it through the lens of their customers, they then become your customers, and you're like, okay, well, how do we actually solve for these problems together? And identifying what those priorities are, and then shifting that into going, okay, well, if this is a problem or if this is a limitation that you're encountering with your customer group that you're servicing, what are the root causes of that problem? And then going from root cause of the problem to going, okay, well, now what is the best way to solve for those root causes? Okay? And then as you solve for those root causes of the problem, that's where you start seeing the solution naturally manifesting itself. And you elements of it to address the root cause of the problems.
Right. So it sounds like a true partnership working towards a solution, which is everyone's ideal, right? And so with that in mind, ultimately, what is the role of the finance leader? Or better yet, what should be the role of the finance leader in this age where technology abounds? You know, a CFO from the 1990s is very different from a CFO in 2022. So from your perspective, what is that role of the finance leader, of the CFO today?
I mean, in the finance leader, from my perspective, as we look into the future based on how it was in the 1990s, that's a good example, is as finance leaders, I think we owe it to our CEOs and our business leaders of how to make better business decisions that are financially prudent. And what I mean by that, and we talk about autonomous finance, we talk about predictive finance. And what I mean by that is the technology has advanced well enough where there is no reason why we can't leverage the data and technology capabilities available to us to inform us what the actual and historical results are from a finance perspective, right? And I think we need to leverage the technology to do that. And we need, as finance leaders, we need to pivot away from going, okay, well, how do I now give more forward-looking data insight? And why I say business decisions, it's not just about my revenue, but it's also about connecting and stitching my customer data back upstream in the business process itself, and to give holistic end-to-end customer insight so that you can stitch together operational data and core finance data together to make a much more holistic business decision that is still financially prudent.
Right. And so you mentioned and touched on data. And so with the technology we have today and the software and the solutions, data and capturing that data is critically important. And are you finding many opportunities to help finance leaders and CFOs gravitate towards solutions that capture a lot of data, and B, are you finding some resistance among financial leaders who really need to get a hold of data and leverage the data for better decision making?
So what I think the common challenge that I still see is finance, and it's not just finance. I see each of the functions operating in their silos.
Right.
And that silo approach is what I believe is one of the biggest roadblocks of how do you break the silos down, right? So let's take your customer service, right? Customer service typically sits outside of finance. And then you have your traditional finance that's managing your AR, for example, right? But if you think about, and then you have your treasury folks managing working capital, right? But everything is connected.
Yep.
And people tend to focus in their little domains and in their little silos, right? You've got the treasury folks focusing on how do I predict working capital? Right? If I take a simple, if I start from the back, right? How do I predict my working capital? And how do I maximize my working capital? Well, that is going to be dependent on the data that you receive and the insight that you receive from your accounts receivable. Right? But then that also is dependent on my customer facing, my customer management, my customer service data as well, which sits outside of finance. Right. And so, but everything is connected and everything has a ripple effect to one another. So if you want to actually move towards a more autonomous, predictive, dynamic finance operating model, you have to, as a finance leader, we need to help people see those connections and break those silos down and help people stitch it together, because that ultimate outcome can be achieved when you bring all those parts together.
True, absolutely. And so at the end of the day, what does an ideal order to cash AR department or side of the equation look like in 2022 and beyond?
So the ideal AR department in my mind will have a few things, right? So one, they are much more strategic. I'm not saying that they're poor partners, right? But much more of a strategic partnership with your client servicing teams. Where it's not that you're just a service provider and you're transactional, because that is, and still in many organizations, the AR team is viewed as a transactional team. Right? But how do you change the dynamics of that relationship where it's no longer the back office transactional team, but it is a partnership of equals between customer service and between client teams, customer service, and your AR team in this use case example, where you are working together in a very dynamic way to say, well, where can I upsell? Where can I service this customer better? Which priorities, which business decisions on this customer do I prioritize? From a dynamic standpoint, is this customer, should we actually be pushing this customer to more contactless payments? Right? Should we be increasing their credit limits? Or should we be reducing it? Right. On the other flip side, which customer, where do we have potential revenue leakage? What are the trends, right? And there's so many pieces of that puzzle that start coming together, where I believe between client teams and even client teams, right? If I'm a lead on a client, if I want to change that conversation that I'm having with my customers, where I am actually, it's much more strategic, it's much more proactive, and I can influence the customer to upsell, right? That's what we're all trying to do, is grow our top line. There's certain insights as the client lead that if I had this insight, I would be able to have a different dialogue. Conversation. Well, some of the sources of that information the infrastructure below it, be it in the AR team or a customer service team, operations team, between those two stitched together, the information is actually there.
Right,
and
right.
being able to tap into that and bring that together.
Right, exactly. And going back again to our first conversation, we talked about sort of the back office mindset of a number of folks who may be in AR, who may be involved in a number of the order to cash steps. And so what would you say to those individuals, those staff members who may have that mindset of back office? What's the one thing you would say to them to begin transitioning them towards being more proactive, a strategic partner, and sort of developing an AR department that is properly equipped for this year and beyond?
So I think it's building strategic partnerships with the customers that you service, right? So your back office function should not be limited to processing your AR, making your collections, closing the books. That's all back office. Much of that can actually get automated in this day and time.
Right.
Alternatively, some of the bridges, some of the tools in operations that you can use to strike the conversation with your customers and start building that credibility and start building that partnership. Mm-hmm. As basic as starting off with operational reviews of the book of business, right? And sitting down with your customers and looking at their customer profiles, their book of business, the health of their customers, what's happening with their customers, what's working, what's not working. And what that does is that it gives you an avenue to also start understanding the needs of the business better.
Right. Exactly.
And as you start understanding the needs of the business and you hear the voice of the customer, right? The voice of the customer is not just for your third-party customer that you're selling your end product to, but it's also internal as well, right?
Absolutely. That's important.
And as you collect that voice of the customer, the next operating review you come in, you start bringing that to the table a little bit more, and you start building, right? So it's, and you start to see little by little the confidence level and the power and the bench of that relationship gets stronger and stronger. Not only are you continuously improving the way you run your operations and the outcomes that you're giving back to your customer, but your customer also, your internal customer, is also starting to naturally, organically tap into you in a little bit of a different way.
Right. That's good stuff, Jasmine. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Savvy Report. Jasmine, thank you very much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you, Ernie. It was a pleasure talking to you as usual.
Same here. Now, our audience was able to glean some incredible insight into how today's order to cash, accounts receivable departments should be positioned for maximum impact for their organizations while delivering greater benefits for their customers. You can find more information about News Corp by visiting www.newscorp.com. And thank you for joining me and my guest, Jasmine Ahmed, on this episode of the Savvy Report. I'm Ernie Martin, and we'll see you next time.